The rain fell in cold sheets, splattering against the windows and creating a soft rhythm in the otherwise still house. Inside, John Harris sat at his small kitchen table, his eyes fixed on the final notice letter that lay in front of him. He had read it 5 times already, but the words still didn't make any more sense. His hands, though not cold, trembled slightly as he ran them over the paper, the weight of the situation pressing down on him with each passing second. Outside, the wind howled across the empty Texas field, its mournful sound filling the space behind the broken screen door. The door, barely hanging on its hinges, banged softly with every gust, adding to the eerie silence inside. John's house had always been a place of warmth and comfort, but now it felt like a ghost of its former self. The silence seemed to swallow everything. The phone hadn't rung in months, and the mailbox only seemed to bring bills and regrets. John had served as a United States Army 9 handler for 17 years, across 2 wars. During those years, he had worked alongside some of the military's most elite working dogs, facing dangers that most people would never experience. He had faced mortar fire, roadside bombs, and ambushes in faraway lands. He had lost friends, seen things no one should ever see, and carried the weight of those experiences every day. But nothing had prepared him for the fight he now faced, the fight that had followed him home. The battle wasn't against enemy soldiers or hidden explosives anymore. No, this was a different kind of war. John fought against the shadows in his mind, the post-traumatic stress disorder that had slowly taken over his life. He fought against the constant stream of medical bills that piled up faster than he could pay them, the memories of his wife's death from cancer, and the slow erosion of everything he once had. He fought against the loneliness, the isolation, and the constant reminder that life had moved on while he had been left behind. Now, sitting at the kitchen table, John was losing the most important thing he had left, his home. The weight of the letter in front of him felt heavier than it had any right to. The bank wanted the house. He had fallen behind on his mortgage payments, and despite his best efforts, he couldn't catch up. The Department of Veterans Affairs had been slow to process his claims, and the medications he was prescribed often did more harm than good. His health was declining, and there seemed to be no way out. He exhaled slowly, his gaze dropping to the form in front of him. His signature was already halfway scrawled across the page, ready to give up the one last thing that had kept him tethered to any semblance of normalcy. But as his hand hovered over the paper, about to finalize the decision, the phone rang. At first, he considered letting it go, but something in his gut told him to answer. With a sigh, he reached for the receiver. "Mr. Harris." The voice on the other end was soft, a woman's voice, but it had an urgency to it. "I'm with the Southern Hills Rescue Center. We recently took in an older German Shepherd that was found abandoned near a railroad outside Houston. He has a tattoo that matches IC9 Unit ID, and it lists you as his original handler." John's heart skipped a beat. "Valor?" he whispered, almost to himself. "We're sure," the woman confirmed. "He's in rough shape. Older, sun-scared. One of his ears is partially missing, but he responds to military cues, and when we called his name, he tried to sit at attention." For a long moment, John couldn't speak. His mind raced, memories flooding him. Valor had been his partner through some of the toughest missions. Valor had been there beside him when they cleared minefields, when they stormed enemy positions, when they brought back soldiers from the brink of death. Valor had been there through it all. And now, after all these years, could it be possible that Valor was still out there? "You're absolutely sure?" John managed to ask, his voice thick with emotion. "We are," the woman replied gently. "We've got him here at the shelter. If you want to come see him, we'll be waiting." Without another word, John dropped the phone onto the counter and stood up. His chair scraped loudly against the floor, but he barely noticed. The letter sat there on the table, still unfinished, but suddenly it didn't seem so important. Without thinking, John grabbed his jacket and headed out the door. the rain still coming down in sheets. 2 hours later, John stood in the entryway of the Southern Hills Rescue Center, the rain still clinging to his jacket. A volunteer led him down a narrow hallway, passing kennel after kennel until they reached the last one. There, lying on a worn blanket, was Valor. The dog was older now, thinner, his once glistening coat now graying and dull. One of his eyes was cloudy, and a scar ran across his flank. But when John stepped forward and whispered, "Valor, sit," the dog's head lifted slowly, ears twitching as he recognized the voice. With effort, Valor pulled himself upright and sat perfectly, just like he always had. Tears sprang to John's eyes as he dropped to his knees, reaching out to his old partner. Valor limped forward, his movements slow but determined, and gently pressed his forehead against John's chest. No barking, no whining, just the quiet connection of two soldiers who had lost everything except each other. In that moment, John realized that Valor had never truly left him. He had been waiting, just as John had, for this moment of reunion. And in that moment, everything changed. The drive back home was quiet, with only the soft hum of the car's engine filling the space between John and Valor. The rain had let up, but the sky remained overcast, casting a dull, gray light over the world. John glanced at Valor every few minutes, his heart still racing from the shock of their reunion. The dog, once so strong and full of energy, now seemed fragile, his body thinner, his fur patchy and worn. But despite the years and the scars of battle, there was something in Valor's eyes that hadn't changed. The loyalty, the bond, the understanding. Valor sat beside him in the passenger seat, his body curled slightly, his head resting on the seat as though he had never been apart from John. Every now and then, Valor would shift, his eyes flicking up to meet John's, as if checking to make sure he was still there, still real. John found himself smiling, but it was a smile tinged with sadness. He had thought he was beyond saving, beyond redemption. His life had become a series of empty moments, filling the hours with memories of battles long past, of a time when he had been someone. But now, here he was, driving home with his old partner by his side, a partner who, despite everything, had never forgotten him, never given up on him. As they turned onto the dirt road that led to his small rundown house, John felt a wave of emotion rush over him. The house, once full of life, now stood in silence. The porch light had long since burned out, and the mailbox was crammed with unopened letters, many stamped in red with the word "final" across them. He had sold most of the furniture just to keep afloat, to pay down medical bills, and the never-ending interest that seemed to multiply faster than he could manage. What remained was a shell, a memory of a life he could never fully reclaim. He parked the car in the driveway and sat there for a moment, staring at the house. Valor didn't move beside him. The dog simply watched the house with a quiet intensity, as if sensing the weight of what had happened here, as if knowing that the house wasn't just a building, but a symbol of all that John had lost. The silence in the car was broken only by the sound of the rain tapping gently against the windshield. John took a deep breath, collecting his thoughts. He wasn't sure what to expect when he opened the door. Would Valor still recognize this place? Would it feel like home again? He got out of the car and opened the door to the house, a cold draft hitting him immediately. The air was stale, filled with the faint scent of dust and disuse. The floor creaked beneath his boots as he stepped inside, the sounds echoing in the empty space. It was the same house he had left, the same house that had been a silent witness to his decline. Yet, as he moved through the darkened hallway, something felt different. There was a subtle shift in the atmosphere, a feeling that the house wasn't quite as cold as it had been. Valor, as if following John's lead, stepped inside behind him, his paws padding softly across the floor. They walked into the living room, where a small electric heater sputtered in the corner, providing the only warmth in the room. John had set up a mattress on the floor, no bed, just a thin mattress covered with a worn sheet. He didn't need much, not anymore. But seeing it again, seeing the bare walls and the cracked window, made him realize just how far he had fallen. "Here you go, old boy," John muttered, his voice rough from disuse, as he laid a worn blanket on the floor beside the heater. But to his surprise, Valor didn't go to the blanket. The dog sniffed it for a moment, then walked past it, heading straight for John. Without hesitation, Valor lay down at his feet, his head resting gently on the boot of the man who had once led him through dust, blood, and fire. John stood still for a moment, looking down at the dog. The weight of everything that had happened pressed on him, but there was something else too. Something that had been missing for so long. Hope, loyalty, purpose. Valor was here, at his side, just like always. And in that quiet moment, John realized that he wasn't truly alone. He hadn't been alone at all. Without a word, John sat down beside Valor, the two of them together on the cold hardwood floor. It wasn't much, but it was enough. For the first time in a long time, John felt like he could breathe again. That night, their dinner was simple, just a can of beans, John's last can. He split it in half, one portion for himself and one for Valor, who ate his portion without hesitation. There was no ceremony, no fanfare, just the quiet understanding between them. They had shared meals like this before, during their time overseas, hunched down behind sandbags in bombed-out buildings, eating what they could find. It was always the same, always stripped of anything unnecessary. They didn't need words to communicate. They knew each other too well for that. After they ate, John leaned back against the wall, the old mug of beans still in his hand, and watched Valor. The dog finished eating and licked the last traces of food from his bowl before returning to his post at John's feet. There was no complaint, no need for comfort. Valor had done his duty, and now, even in the quiet of their small home, he was still on duty. As John sat there, the weight of the world pressing down on him, he realized something else. Valor had saved him, not in the way he thought. There were no medals, no heroic actions that could be documented in a report, but Valor had given him something more valuable than any award. He had given John a reason to keep going. Later that night, John lay on the mattress, staring up at the ceiling. His body ached and his mind raced, but he couldn't sleep. Too many memories, too many ghosts. But as he lay there in the dark, he heard soft paw steps beside him. Valor limped into the room, his movements slow but purposeful. Instead of lying down on the rug like he used to, Valor sat facing the door, alert and watchful. John turned off the light, closing his eyes. He could feel Valor's presence beside him, still on duty, even after all these years, and for the first time in a long time, John felt safe. They sat together in silence, just like always, one resting, the other watching. But it wasn't just the silence of two soldiers who had seen too much. It was the silence of understanding, of partnership, of a bond that nothing could break. And as John drifted off to sleep with Valor by his side, he knew that, no matter what, they would face whatever came next together. The mornings were different now. Every day, John woke earlier than he ever had before. It wasn't the usual alarm clock that had jolted him out of sleep in the past, but a gentle nudge from Valor. The dog would nudge his hand or tap his paw against the floor, his eyes bright and alert even as the sun barely touched the horizon. The world outside still felt cold, still felt unforgiving. But inside, something was shifting. With Valor beside him, John didn't feel quite as alone. Their routine was simple. John would sit at the small kitchen table, sipping his coffee, while Valor curled up beside him, his eyes still watching him with that ever-present loyalty. It wasn't much, but it was something. Each moment spent with Valor was a small victory, a reminder that there was more to life than the constant weight of the past. They began walking together again. Slowly at first, just down the cracked sidewalk in front of the house. John's joints ached, his body stiff from years of neglect, but he pushed through it. Valor, though his body was no longer as spree as it had been in their prime, was always at his side. his tail wagging in rhythm with John's steps. The dog had aged, yes. His coat had thinned, and his movements were slower, but his spirit remained unbroken. The two of them, once strong together, were now navigating their world side by side, relying on each other in ways they never had before. The old house that John had once thought of as a burden began to feel different. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, it started to come back to life. He no longer dreaded the quiet of the house. Instead, he started to fix the little things. The broken window, the creaky floorboards, the flickering light on the porch. It wasn't much, but it was progress. And progress, even small, was something John had almost forgotten how to hope for. One afternoon, John stood in the small backyard behind the house, a ball in his hand. The backyard, once overrun with weeds and clutter, had been cleaned up a little. John had picked up the pieces of broken wood and metal, organizing what was left of the yard into something manageable. He glanced over at Valor, who was sitting nearby, his body still but his gaze fixed on John, as if waiting for something. "Ready, boy?" John asked softly. Valor's ears perked up, and John saw the familiar flicker of energy in the dog's eyes. It was a look he had seen so many times in the past, during their missions, during training. The dog was alert, ready, as if he had never left the field. With a sharp motion, John threw the ball across the yard, calling out "Go," in the same voice he had used years ago when they trained together. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then Valor was off, limping but moving with surprising speed and precision. His ribs pressed gently against his skin with each breath, but he was focused, determined. The ball landed, and with a final burst of energy, Valor retrieved it, his old instincts still sharp despite the years. John stood there, watching in awe, as Valor trotted back to him with the ball in his mouth, dropping it at his feet. The dog's tail wagged, and there was a look of satisfaction in his eyes, as if he had just completed another mission. "You've still got it, old boy," John said, his voice thick with emotion. For the first time in a long while, John felt a sense of pride, not just in Valor, but in himself. He had been stuck in the past for so long, haunted by memories of wars and losses. But now, watching Valor, he realized something. They had both survived. And they were still here, still fighting, still moving forward. Later that evening, John was sitting on the porch when he saw a young man across the street, the neighbor's son, standing with his phone pointed at the backyard. The boy had been watching John and Valor for a few days now, and John had noticed the occasional glances his way. The next morning, John heard the faint sound of laughter coming from across the street. He looked up to see the neighbor's son running inside, holding his phone out in front of him. There was a video on the screen, and John didn't need to guess what it was. He could see Valor running with the ball, his old form coming back to life with every step. The boy had posted the video on social media, and it had already started to gain traction. A few days later, John received a notification on his phone. It was a comment on the video, but this wasn't just any comment. The video had exploded. Thousands of people were watching, sharing, and commenting on the story of a retired K9 and his handler. Messages poured in from across the country, from veterans, dog lovers, and people who simply saw the bond between John and Valor as something pure and inspiring. One comment stuck out. "These two give me a reason to stand up tomorrow." At first, John was overwhelmed. He didn't know how to respond to all the messages, to the newfound attention. But then, a local news station reached out, asking for an interview. They wanted to hear about the dog who had saved his handler's life, about the unbreakable bond between a man and his canine partner. The idea of being in the spotlight made John uncomfortable, but he knew this wasn't about him. This was about Valor. This was about the dog who had never given up on him, even when the world seemed to have forgotten them both. The interview was brief but impactful. John and Valor sat together on the porch, as they always did. The reporter asked the usual questions, but when she asked the one that John had been dreading, he felt his heart skip a beat. "Mr. Harris," the reporter asked gently, "after everything you've been through, why do you keep fighting?" John looked down at Valor, who was sitting beside him, his head resting on his paws, eyes still watching John as if waiting for something. For a long moment, John didn't say anything. He simply looked at the dog, the one who had stood by him through everything, the one who had never once left his side. "Because he still looks at me like I matter," John said finally, his voice steady. "And because he does, maybe I do too." The camera kept rolling, but for a moment, no one spoke. The silence between John and Valor spoke louder than any words ever could. As the videos spread across social media, more and more people began to notice. Messages flooded in from veterans, from dog owners, from people who had been touched by the story of Valor's devotion and John's resilience. It was a reminder of what love and loyalty truly meant. And for John, it was a reminder that he wasn't alone anymore. As the days passed, the world began to shift around John and Valor. The viral video that captured Valor's playful moment in the yard turned into something more, a symbol of hope, resilience, and the unbreakable bond between a soldier and his dog. The messages, the interviews, and the stories pouring in from strangers were overwhelming at times, but they also filled John with a quiet sense of pride. For the first time in years, people were recognizing him, not for his past losses, but for the courage to keep moving forward. But life, as John knew all too well, was unpredictable. Just as he had begun to find some semblance of peace, fate decided to remind him of the fragility of it all. It happened on a night that seemed just like any other. The house was quiet, and the only sound was the occasional creak of the floorboards under John's worn boots. Valor was curled up on his blanket near the heater, his body now more frail than John would have liked to admit. The dog's ribs pressed gently against his fur with each slow breath, but his eyes still held the same sharpness that John remembered from their time in combat. The two of them had grown accustomed to the quiet. Each day was a small victory. John had resumed working on fixing up the house, patching up leaks, clearing the yard, and even getting a small garden going. He had stopped relying so heavily on medication, taking only what was absolutely necessary. And he had started cooking proper meals again, something he hadn't done in years. The routine, as mundane as it seemed, had begun to heal him in ways he hadn't expected. But that night, the weight of the past came crashing back with a force John hadn't prepared for. He had just finished dinner, a simple chicken and rice meal shared with Valor, and was sitting on the couch when he suddenly felt it. A sharp, agonizing pain behind his eyes, followed by a wave of dizziness that made everything spin. He stood up too quickly, his head swarming, his body suddenly betraying him as his knees buckled beneath him. His vision blurred as his breath hitched, and before he could call out, he collapsed onto the cold tile floor of the kitchen. His hand scrambled for the counter, but it was too late. His body went limp, and his mind seemed to fade in and out, as if caught between two worlds. He couldn't move, couldn't reach the phone, couldn't do anything. The house was silent again, just as it had been before, but this time, it wasn't just the silence of an empty room. It was the silence of uncertainty, of not knowing whether he would survive the night. In the midst of the chaos in his mind, one thing remained clear: Valor, the dog, who had been beside him through every storm, was here now too. He could feel the gentle pressure of Valor's nose nudging his chest, trying to get a response. Valor's soft whine filled the room as he pawed at John, but there was no answer. The old dog's eyes widened with concern, but he didn't panic. Instead, he did what he had always done. He protected. Valor understood that John was in danger, and for the first time in years, John realized that he wasn't the only one capable of saving them both. Valor's instinct took over. The old German shepherd, despite his age and frailty, rose to his feet, his joints creaking with the effort. He looked around, eyes scanning the room for any sign of help, but there was none. The front door was locked, and John was too far gone to reach for the phone. There was only one thing left to do. With surprising speed, Valor limped toward the front door. His body moved slowly, but his mind was sharp, focused on one thing: getting help for his handler. With all the strength he could muster, he clawed at the door with his paws, his old body trembling with the effort. The screen door cracked under the pressure, and with a final push, it swung open into the dark street outside. Valor's breath came in short bursts, his chest rising and falling as he made his way onto the street, his legs buckling beneath him with each step. The night was dark and quiet, the only sound the faint rustle of the wind through the trees. But Valor was undeterred. He barked, not in the usual playful way, but in a desperate, frantic tone, loud and fast, as if his very life depended on it. His bark echoed down the empty street, a plea for help. A sheriff's cruiser, cruising down the quiet road, slowed as it approached. The headlights flashed over Valor's form, and the officer in the vehicle slowed, expecting to see a stray dog. But Valor didn't move. Instead, he ran straight for the car, barking relentlessly, urging the officer to stop. The deputy inside the cruiser opened the door, his gaze confused at the sight of the dog running toward him. Before the officer could react, Valor bit down gently on the deputy's jacket sleeve, not hard, but firmly enough to get his attention. Then, just as quickly as he had lunged, Valor released the jacket and ran back toward the house, looking over his shoulder to make sure the officer was following. The sheriff's deputy, now fully aware that this was no ordinary dog, followed behind Valor as he led the way back to John's house. The deputy arrived at the front door just in time to find John lying on the floor, unconscious, his body still. He immediately radioed for paramedics, knowing the situation was critical. The ambulance arrived within minutes, and the paramedics rushed inside, tending to John's lifeless form. Valor, however, didn't leave. He stood at the threshold, his body stiff and alert, refusing to move as the paramedics worked. He watched as they loaded John into the ambulance, his eyes never leaving his handler's side. It wasn't until the ambulance doors closed and the sirens screamed down the road that Valor allowed himself to step back, his body trembling with exhaustion. The entire scene had been captured on the sheriff's cruiser's dashboard camera, from the moment Valor ran into the road to the moment he guided the officer to John's side. The video, posted by the sheriff's department, quickly went viral. Within hours, it had millions of views as people from all over the country watched the incredible act of devotion and loyalty from a retired K9. News outlets picked up the story, calling it a miracle, and many people were moved by the raw emotion of the moment. But to John, it wasn't a miracle. It was just Valor doing what he had always done, protecting the one person who had never abandoned him. The fundraiser that followed, created by veterans and dog lovers, raised more than $900,000 within 3 days. Donations poured in from people who had been touched by Valor's actions, who had witnessed the bond between John and his dog, and felt compelled to help. The story of Valor's loyalty and John's resilience became a national sensation, showing people the power of love and devotion, even in the most difficult of circumstances. At the hospital, John recovered, and with the donations, he was able to pay off his medical bills and keep his home. But the real healing was found in the bond that John and Valor shared, something no amount of money could buy. The two warriors, once torn apart by time and circumstance, had come together again in a way that defied explanation. And together, they would continue facing whatever came next, side by side.